Good afternoon, everybody. It's so wonderful to be here. Pushu danse zonge bene sianene tishnakas niga ni bene siga bo tishnakas kinu totem. It's a pleasure to be here, and before I begin my introduction of our next speaker, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the ancestors of this territory, the Ohlone, the coastal Miwok, and of course, here in San Rafael, the Pomo Nation. So I just wanted to make sure and say that as a guest here in this territory visiting, I walk with respect and ask those ancestors to bless us all as we spend the next couple of days together. Eriel Deranger is of the land near Uranium City, Saskatchewan, in Treaty 8 traditional territory of the Dene Sutlene. Her parents were both a deep part of the American Indian movement, being both Wounded Knee veterans, and as we say up north, were true bush people. 1979 was the year Eriel was born, and while still in the womb of her mother, Susanna, her family was forcibly removed by gunpoint from their land in Saskatchewan to make way for El Dorado Uranium Mining Company's plans to wreak havoc on that beautiful territory in the water. So you can literally say that she was born into this beautiful struggle. Eriel's organizing has pulled together powerful social movement vehicles in an intersectional movement framework that has resulted in the emergence of one of the most powerful and visible keep it in the ground campaigns on the planet, the International Indigenous Tar Sands campaign. With her nations, and relatives in the Athabasca, Peace River, and Cold Lake region in Alberta, Canada, they have shone a light on one of the most controversial fossil fuel battlegrounds and also on the environmental racism of the Canadian government and oil sands sector that Canada has been jacked by. I met Eriel years ago in Ottawa, the capital city of Canada. And she was graduating from a fellowship program of one of Canada's foundations. I had heard about her through a mutual colleague who was mentoring her through this program. And it was a week before the first Indigenous Tar Sands action camp in her own home community of Fort Chipewyan. And when my friend told me about her, I was like, wow, I've got to meet this person and see if she wants to go to Alberta and take on every single oil company of the planet in her territory. And when I met her, she's like, oh, I'm already doing that. Yeah, I'll totally go home and see all my cousins. And, well, the rest is history. Over the years, we have intervened at UN climate summits. We have lobbied together foreign governments, the EU, France, the UK. We've participated in mass mobilizations across the planet, lifting up Indigenous people's voices on the front line of the battle against the fossil fuel industry. We've intervened in their own shareholder meetings of Shell, BP, France's Total Fina, Stat Oil in Norway. All incredible work in allyship with other Indigenous peoples across the planet fighting for climate justice. As part of Eriel's work, she was a founder of the Tar Sands Healing Walk, a social movement vehicle based in ceremony rather than protest. For 5 years, her and her fellow sister campaigners, in collaboration with elders and youth, organized an annual healing walk that took people who wanted to pray for the land and water on a healing walk through the tar sands. This walk led to healing walks across the continent in key fossil fuel battlegrounds, including right here in the Bay Area in Richmond, organized by the local Bay Area chapter of Idle No More. Big shout out to the local Idle No More chapter. The following video is from the 5th Healing Walk in Alberta and will set the context much more eloquently and deeper than I can. Please watch and feel the power of our ancestors, and then join me after the video in welcoming a truly special leader, a mother, a campaigner, and inspiration to movement nerds like me, Eriel Deranger.
are able to survive. No one can survive here.
I believe we were once capable of great things in the past, and we can be once again in harnessing those four energies and harnessing those four elements and making sure that we do sustain, reduce our carbon footprint, and we create a way forward for all of us. Recognizing that there's great destruction happening here, that this extractive industry is destroying our chance for a future, destroying our children's chance for a future. And we're here to say right now that with strong alliances across the nation, we can put a stop to this type of activity and get back to doing what's right for our people.
Resistance is natural, ancestral energies, guide us in survival, decolonize memories. Apologies will never make amends for your colonies.
And in order for that system to work, they have to mine our minds to get at the essence of our spirit. The mining of the essence, the mining of the spirit, mining our minds. The pollution from that is all of the neurotic, distorted, insecure behavior patterns that we develop. That's the pollution. But it's a disease. It lives and travels through the mind, through the generations.
Silent, no, I don't know more. Solidarity, yeah, unity, yeah, culture, yeah, community, yeah, solidarity, yeah, unity, yeah, culture, yeah, community, yeah, solidarity, yeah, unity, yeah, culture, yeah, community, solidarity, yeah, unity, yeah, culture, yeah, community. Elders and children all unite to keep alive our way of life.
Even if it's the last one, maybe there'll be a bigger one, a bigger one, where each and every one of us will be there, and all our friends and our relatives there with us to take care of our Mother Earth and her water that we are.
Thank you. Masi Cho. Iglanite, Eriel Deranger hushiat etsin, ne jan tridiate gochin dene sutlene hot isin. Masi Cho. My name is Eriel Deranger, and I'm from the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, and I'd like to honor the Ohlone, Coast Miwok, and Pomo peoples for allowing me to speak here today. A new vision is emerging, but we have to look back. Despite centuries of sustained oppression against our collective existence as Indigenous people, we continue to represent over 5,000 languages, cultures worldwide. Indigenous people have retained our traditions and our distinct cultures, economic and political structures. And through centuries of oppression, colonization, and attempted assimilation, our people have survived and persevered. However, we still struggle for the recognition of our humanity and our rights as Indigenous people. It's time that we abandon the patriarchal and colonial ideologies rooted in things like the doctrine of discovery and terra nullius. We have always been here and we were never discovered. Today, we are facing a global crisis, climate change. Indigenous people are not only threatened by colonial policies to eradicate our rights, our cultures and identities that are intrinsically linked to our places of origin are now threatened by man-made climate change. Coastlines are rising, changing weather patterns, floods, droughts, out-of-control forest fires, and species disappearing. It's Indigenous peoples and land-based peoples that feel it first and most adversely. So who am I? I'm an Indigenous person. And like many Indigenous people who work and walk within the environmental movement, I've never actually considered myself an environmentalist. First and foremost, I am that little Indigenous girl sitting in that stroller in the front. I'm a proud member of the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, the Kaitale Dene Sutlane, the people of the willow, a reference to the delta where my people have lived since time immemorial. Right now, my people's rights and culture are in the crosshairs of the largest giga-project on Earth, the Tar Sands. The legacy of this project is one of contamination and out-of-control pollution that puts us all at risk. It consists of toxic lakes that cover 240 square kilometers and seeping contaminants into the river systems that my people rely on. It creates as much greenhouse gas emissions as all of the vehicles in Canada combined. And if left unchecked, it could double, if not triple. It's out of control. And yet, with all these facts and stats, I'm still just that little Indigenous girl. I'm an Indigenous woman working to ensure that my children and the generations to come have an ability to understand our culture, our identity, and our connections to our places of being. I have found allies and kinship within the environmental movement, and I've begun to find hope. I've begun to believe that we can stop this destruction and start this process of healing and reconciliation and decolonization and challenging the status quo of the blind acceptance of, and the marginalization of Indigenous peoples. The climate movement is changing and growing and incorporating and integrating Indigenous rights into their campaigns and practices. However, this hasn't happened because of the goodwill of people. It's happened because of Indigenous people's tireless work for the recognition of our rights. So I have to honor and recognize those who gave their lives and sacrificed so much to allow me to stand here in front of you today. Today, or this year, commemorates the 20th anniversary of the death of Ken Saro-Wiwa, an Indigenous Ogoni activist. And his legacy and the legacy of Ogoni people is often one that I look to for strength in my own struggle. Like the Ogoni people, we are people of a delta, fighting some of the largest multinational corporations in the world that have an insatiable desire for oil. The Ogoni people created the Ogoni Bill of Rights in 1990, and it's one of the formidable documents that demonstrates our Indigenous demands for autonomy, recognition, and sovereignty from colonial governments. And since that time, there has been a dramatic shift in the recognition of the unique rights of Indigenous people, from Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa, the United Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, Truth and Reconciliation in Canada, and the countless court victories recognizing and affirming Indigenous people's rights. We are shaping the future. These founders have allowed me to stand here today, and they have created this merging of movements, but it hasn't come without its challenges. It's easy to forget that Indigenous communities have faced centuries of systemic oppression that has robbed us our ability to easily enter local, national, and international forums where policies and decisions are being made that ultimately affect our rights and our cultural survival. As we attempt to merge these movements, it's imperative that we work together to find ways to address the roots of oppression and not get lost in surface issues like simply protecting a piece of land, as was commonly done by early inceptions of the environmental movement. It's become imperative that we work together to address colonialism, racism, sexism, and the continued marginalization of those that have been deemed less worthy. Throughout the last decade, it's been my experience that organizations are still struggling to find effective mechanisms to address these inequalities and include Indigenous peoples more effectively. While current methodologies of inclusion have proven to be effective in raising the profile of these communities by creating physical space for them at key events like the People's Climate March, there is still work to be done to fully actualize and empower communities to develop independent and sovereign strategies that encapsulate international standards of recognition of our rights as defined by things like the Ogoni Bill of Rights and the Indigenous Peoples' Rights, or the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Our communities remain on the front lines. And many of our communities often receive little to none of the financial profits reaped from the exploitation of resources in our territory, and instead we are left with a legacy of desecration of our cultures and rights. And while we remain on the front lines of this environmental racism, we remain poorly resourced, poorly staffed, and poorly supported. It's time for us to stop and reevaluate the power dynamics that exist within this movement and dissect the dichotomy of high-level environmental organizations and the grassroots Indigenous communities. A new way forward is emerging, and Indigenous peoples are leading the way. From the Beaver Lake in northern Alberta, who have set a legal precedence by launching a litigation highlighting the thousands, tens of thousands of treaty violations created from tar sands extraction, to the Unistoten that have set up blockades stopping the construction of gas, oil, and tar sands pipeline through their territory in northern BC, to the Ilsipuktuk First Nation in New Brunswick in eastern Canada fighting the fracking of shale oil on their sacred lands, sparking an anti-fracking movement in Canada. To communities here in the United States like the Hidatsu, Arikara, and Mandan in North Dakota challenging the development of the Bakken oil fields. And in the north, the Indigenous Inupiaq communities have stood up en masse challenging offshore drilling in the Arctic, and it's resulted in Shell pulling their application to drill. As we continue to the south, the Nahuatl and the Otomi people of Mexico are rising up against the exploitation in their traditional territories, working alongside groups like the Zapatistas. The Awahun in Peru challenging illegal exploration and exploitation in the Peruvian Amazon. The Quechua people of the Sariaku in Ecuador fighting oil and gas exploitation in their traditional territories in Ecuador. Our people are becoming the face of the environmental movement, and this hasn't happened by accident. It's because our people have the legal and moral authority to stand up and challenge these systems of oppression that have brought us to where we are today. In addition, we have a deep spiritual connection to these places, this place we call Mother Earth. Indigenous people of the global north and the global south have been utilizing a platform created by our ancestors, the foundations of our culture, to safeguard our river systems, our food systems, our culture, our identity, and our land base. There's a prophecy that says that at this time in Earth history, the eagle and the condor will rejoin, remembering they are one. They will reconnect and remember their common origin and share knowledge and wisdom and save each other. The eagle and the condor will fly together, and the world will come into balance at a point of near extinction. We are at that point now. If we do not work together, we will not survive. A new consciousness is emerging. Indigenous people globally are demanding recognition of who we are, and there is an undeniable resurgence of indigeneity and Indigenous people reclaiming their places and spaces in society. This couldn't be more true than what we are witnessing in the environmental movement. As Candy Mossett from the Mandan, Arikara, and Hidatsu Nation, we have a future worth fighting for. While the changes in the climate movement have shown great strength in the past decade of cross-sectoral collaboration, we need to push for more. We need to respect Indigenous rights, demanding the implementation of models of free, prior, and informed consent, the right to say no. We have to adopt bare minimum standards to protect Indigenous people's rights, and we can do this within the environmental movement by demanding our own organizations adopt policies and practices, campaigns, and strategies that reflect and uphold these rights. And in order to move forward, we're going to have to look back. Foundational structures of high-profile and successful NGOs were not born overnight, and neither can ours. They grew with time and increased access to resources, information, and people. It's imperative that this same process and the time and the resources necessary for the success of the environmental movement and groups is afforded to Indigenous communities here and beyond. This will require a tremendous shift in the current practices in the environmental movement. This will require a dissection of the power and privilege access to resources, a redistribution of those resources and land, and a deconstruction of the patriarchal and colonial methodologies that are still currently utilized today. We have to find a way to work together, not just as environmentalists and Indigenous people, but we have to take steps and build mechanisms to achieve true justice, and not simply just protect a piece of land or pass a policy, because these things are allowing the perpetuation of the status quo and the marginalization of people to continue. The end goals of our movements are the same. We want to protect lands, we want to protect ecosystems, we want to protect the environment. However, it's the different tactics, the different strategies, the different visions, and the foundations that drive our movements forward that becomes increasingly hard to reconcile. And it's supported by this historical status quo that considers my people, Indigenous people, as a second-class citizen. It's time to set aside those differences and walk side by side. Share our strategies, share our resources, and build a movement that benefits everyone equally. We have future generations to think about. 13-year-old Takaya Blaney, who was in the video, once said that it's not what kind of future we're leaving for our children, but it's what kind of children are we leaving for our future. We must nurture and support our children to be proud Indigenous people who believe that anything is possible and that we are not bound by the status quo that involves the desecration of our rights, our values, and our cultures, and our indigeneity. We need to nurture our children to be people who will carry on our role as caretakers and stewards of the land and speak for those who cannot speak. And my people are doing that. In Alberta, in the heart of the tar sands, there's a community called Little Buffalo. And they have been standing up to decades of intensive oil, gas, logging, fracking, and tar sands exploitation, and they don't even have running water. Yet they decided that they wanted to forge a new future and be powered by the sun. Melina Labucon-Massimo from Little Buffalo said that they're refusing to be victims in the game of fossil fuel roulette. And the communities like Little Buffalo are leading the way towards energy independence for their communities. This example is being followed by communities like the Beaver Lake Cree Nation that are finalizing their own commitments to develop a 20 kilowatt solar project and taking the necessary steps towards self-determination and becoming a powerful symbol of energy sovereignty and community pride. My nation has developed a Guardian program as a part of our community-based monitoring program, and it's guided by the wisdom of the elders. And these people will watch over and care for our land on behalf of our nation. They will develop strategies to undertake activities to monitor and protect our traditional lands and our rights. They will watch, they will listen, and they will understand, and they will report on any illegal activities that may cause harm to the ecology, our traditional lands, and our rights as ACFN. These endeavors and these examples cannot move forward without the support of the greater movement. We have to support these communities, and we can no longer do it alone. So while the environmental movement may still have a long way to go to fully integrate and respect the multitude of issues to achieve true justice, there is hope. The beauty of humanity is our ability to continually evolve at such tremendous rates. And through this process of evolution, we have developed hindsight, empathy, compassion, and love. We can learn from our mistakes of our ancestors, and we can learn to build better futures for generations to come. In that context, the environmental movement is demonstrative of the integral part of humanity's evolutionary process to grow. We can grow change, and truly move towards justice that is holistic and reflects our intersectionality with each other and the planet. I'm over time, but I only have one more slide. So what's so amazing is that behind almost every story I've heard and every movement I've been a part of, it's women who are leading the way. Our traditions and our cultures believe that women are the keepers of the water, and it is with the power of our culture, our indigeneity, and that water that our Indigenous women continue to push forward and break down systems of patriarchy and reclaim our places and spaces in modern society with our indigeneity intact. So I want to thank you all for having me today, and I encourage you to support Indigenous communities in your area. Thank you. Masicho.